"You're here only to look after my twins," the angry mountain man growled. His cabin stood alone in a valley of deep snow and deeper silence, where the wind cut like a knife. She came with nothing but a carpetbag, a Bible, and a promise to care for two half-wild children. He made it clear his heart was off limits, but the valley was changing. Men in fine coats and polished boots were coming up the trail, carrying papers that could take his land before spring thaw. The children clung to her skirts, unaware of the danger riding ever closer. She thought she'd been hired to keep a home, not to fight for it. Now, every step she takes, every word she speaks, could mean the difference between safety and ruin. And somewhere between thawing his heart and guarding the hearth, she discovers a truth he's been hiding, one that could bind them forever, or break them apart. Before we dive in, drop your name or city in the comments. It reminds me that behind every view is a real heartbeat. The mountain wind rattled the cabin's shutters as Clara unpacked her meager belongings in the small bedroom. Her fingers trembled slightly as she arranged her Bible on the rough-hewn bedside table, the leather cover worn smooth from years of daily reading. The single window offered a view of nothing but swirling snow, and the chill crept through the glass despite the heavy curtain she'd hung. A quiet shuffle at her doorway made her turn. Little Lily stood there, thumb near her mouth, watching with dark eyes that reminded Clara so much of the native children she'd taught at the mission school. The girl's black hair hung in two neat braids, though the ends were starting to unravel. "Would you like me to fix your braids?" Clara asked softly, holding out her hand. Lily hesitated, glancing back toward the main room, where Elias's shadow moved across the wall. Then she nodded and crept forward, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Clara patted the edge of her bed, and Lily climbed up, turning so Clara could reach her hair. As she worked the tangles free with gentle fingers, she heard Sam's boots scraping across the floor outside her room. He appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, watching with the same guarded expression his father wore. "Your sister's hair will look pretty when it's properly plaited," Clara said, keeping her voice warm and steady. "Would you like yours brushed too?" "No, ma'am," Sam answered, but he didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe, his eyes fixed on his sister. The fire in the main room crackled, and Elias's heavy footsteps crossed to the woodpile. Clara could feel the tension radiating from him even through the wall. His earlier words still stung. "You're here only to look after my twins," as if she were some unwanted intruder rather than the answer to his own request for help. Lily's hair was silk smooth now beneath Clara's fingers as she separated it into sections for braiding. "Your mama must have taught you to sit so still for braiding," she said softly. "I don't remember Mama much," Lily whispered. "Just her singing sometimes." Sam shifted in the doorway. She sang the mountain songs from her people. Clara nodded, keeping her movements gentle and rhythmic as she plaited. "Those songs are precious memories. Would you tell me about them sometime?" "Pa doesn't like talk about Mama," Sam said, his young voice rough. "Makes him sad." Through the wall, the sound of wood being stacked paused briefly. Clara's heart ached, knowing Elias must have heard. She finished Lily's braid in silence, tying it off with a piece of ribbon from her pocket. "There. Now," she said, patting Lily's shoulder. "All tidy again." Lily reached back to touch the neat plait, a small smile lifting the corners of her mouth. She slid off the bed and went to her brother, who took her hand automatically. They disappeared into the main room, leaving Clara alone with the howling wind and her thoughts. The floorboards creaked under Elias's weight as he moved about the cabin. Clara could picture him, tall and broad-shouldered, his face stern beneath his dark beard. The mission letter had mentioned his late wife only briefly, a Ute woman who'd passed from pneumonia 2 winters ago. Clara had seen the grief in his eyes when he'd first opened the door, mixed with something like anger at finding her there. She knelt beside her bed, clasping her hands together. The rough wood floor pressed against her knees through her skirts as she bowed her head. "Lord," she whispered, "grant me patience. Help me bring light to this home." A particularly fierce gust rattled the window, making the flame in her small lamp dance dot in the other room. She heard the soft murmur of Elias's voice as he spoke to the twins, followed by the scrape of chair legs on the floor, likely settling them for their evening lessons. Despite his gruff manner, she'd seen how tenderly he touched Lily's hair, how his hand rested protectively on Sam's shoulder. Clara rose from her prayers and moved to add wood to her small fire. Through the thin wall, she could hear Elias clear his throat, then the soft crackle of pages turning. She imagined him sitting in his chair by the hearth, the firelight catching in his dark hair, remembering another woman who had once sat there, laughing and singing mountain songs to their children. The wind moaned around the cabin's corners, and snow continued to fall in the darkness beyond her window. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, knowing the long winter ahead would test more than just her endurance of the cold. The pale winter sun crept over the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the snow-covered yard. Clara woke to the sound of uneven thwacks coming from outside. She pulled on her heavy wool dress and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders before stepping into the main room. Through the frost-edged window, she spotted Sam in the yard, struggling with a hatchet against a chunk of wood. The boy's face was red with effort, his breath coming out in frustrated puffs of steam. The blade barely bit into the wood, glancing off at awkward angles. Clara slipped outside, the crisp morning air biting at her cheeks. "Good morning, Sam," she called softly, not wanting to startle him. Sam lowered the hatchet, his expression guarded. "Pa says we need kindling. May I show you something?" Clara approached slowly, as she might with a skittish colt. When Sam didn't back away, she continued, "The blade's gotten dull. If you angle it like this," she demonstrated with her hands, "it'll bite better, even when it needs sharpening." Sam watched intently as she explained, his defensive posture gradually relaxing. After a few attempts following her guidance, the wood split with a satisfying crack. A hint of pride flickered across his face. "Much obliged," he mumbled, the words barely audible. Back inside, Clara stirred up the banked coals and set about making porridge. The cabin was quiet, except for the pop and crackle of the growing fire. Lily's bed remained conspicuously occupied, a small lump huddled beneath quilts. "Lily," Clara called gently, "I'm about to warm some bread on the hearth. Would you like to help me?" The quilts stirred slightly. A dark eye peeked out, considering the offer. After a long moment, Lily emerged, her night braids messy from sleep. She padded over to the hearth, keeping a careful distance from Clara while watching the bread warm on the stones. Heavy boots crossed the porch, and Elias entered, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He nodded curtly at Clara before turning to the children. "Got a ride to town for supplies. Storm's coming in few days." He fixed Clara with a stern look. "Don't wander far. Mountain weather turns quick." "Yes, Mr. McCord," Clara replied evenly. "We'll mind the cabin." After Elias rode out, Clara set about putting the cabin to rights. She found torn shirts stuffed behind a trunk and settled in to mend them, showing Lily how to thread a needle. The little girl proved to have nimble fingers, carefully practicing on a scrap of fabric. Sam brought in the split wood, stacking it neatly by the hearth without being asked. Clara noticed how he straightened the pile until it met his satisfaction. When she asked him to help sweep, he took to the task with the same quiet determination. Throughout the day, Clara guided the children through simple chores, praising their efforts and teaching with gentle patience. Lily helped sort dried beans for supper, while Sam learned to bank the coals properly. The cabin gradually took on a more orderly appearance. dust vanishing from corners and dishes finding proper homes on shelves. As evening drew near, Clara lit the lamp and opened her small Bible. The leather cover was soft with age, the pages marked with pressed flowers from her teaching days. She began reading in a clear, warm voice, letting the familiar words fill the quiet cabin. At first, the twins stayed by the hearth, pretending not to listen. But as Clara continued, they edged closer, drawn by the story of David's courage against Goliath. Soon Lily sat at Clara's feet, while Sam leaned against the wall nearby, his face thoughtful in the lamplight. The cabin door opened after dark, bringing Elias and a blast of cold air. He paused just inside, taking in the tidied room, the mended shirts folded nearby, and the children's relaxed postures. His eyes met Clara's briefly before sliding away. "It'll do," he said gruffly, turning to unbuckle his coat. Clara rose to prepare for bed, gathering her things for washing up. As she passed the children's room, she overheard their whispered conversation. "She smells like cinnamon," Lily was saying, "not soap like Miss Jenkins from town." "Maybe she bakes," Sam replied softly. Pa said she came from a mission school. Clara slipped into her room, a small smile touching her lips. She lit her own lamp and knelt for her evening prayers, the familiar routine comforting after the long day. Through the wall, she could hear Elias moving about, his footsteps somehow less heavy than the night before. 3 days passed in a steady rhythm of chores and lessons before the supplies began running low. The morning dawned clear but bitter cold as Clara bundled up in her warmest shawl and climbed into the sleigh beside Elias. The leather seat creaked beneath them, frost crackling under the horses' hooves as they set out for town. Tiny brass bells jingled with each step of the matched team, their sound bright against the hushed winter landscape. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, stealing glances at Elias's profile. His expression remained as frozen as the mountain peaks looming behind them. As they passed the Thompson place, old Jim Thompson looked up from his fence mending. He raised his hand in greeting, then quickly lowered it when he caught sight of Elias. The next homestead's windows remained conspicuously empty as they passed, though Clara spotted curtains twitching. "Folks seem a mite reserved," Clara ventured carefully. "They always have been," Elias replied, his voice flat as the snow-covered prairie. The town's main street was busy with morning traffic when they arrived. Elias helped Clara down from the sleigh, his hand strong but impersonal through her thick mittens. The mercantile's bell chimed as they entered, warm air heavy with the scent of coffee and leather goods washing over them, while Elias spoke with Mr. Peterson about flour prices. Clara wandered the aisles, making note of what they needed. Near the back of the store, 2 men stood talking in low voices, not noticing her approach. "Railroad's pushing hard now," one muttered, adjusting his hat. "Offering cash to settlers squatting on Ute lands up valley. That McCord place sits right where they want their depot," the other replied. "Heard tell they're getting impatient with his kind holding out." Clara's hand stilled on a shelf of lamp oil. She pretended to study the labels while listening intently. "A natural," the first man continued. "Man taking Indian land through marriage, then refusing good Christian money for it." "Hush up," his companion warned. "He's just yonder." Clara selected her oil and moved away, her mind churning with questions. At the counter, she found Elias finishing his business, his shoulders rigid beneath his heavy coat. Outside, a group of men stood, smoking near the hitching post. One spat into the snow as Elias helped Clara into the sleigh. "Awful lot of mixed blood up in the high country these days," he drawled, loud enough to carry. "Ain't seemly." Clara watched Elias's jaw tighten, the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He said nothing, just climbed up beside her and took up the reins. The sleigh lurched forward, bells jangling discordantly as they left town behind. The return journey stretched long and silent. Every creak of the runners across the snow seemed to underscore the tension. Clara could feel radiating from Elias. The afternoon sun cast their shadow far ahead on the trail, a single dark shape against the white. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Clara found Elias sitting alone by the fire. He stared into the flames, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The cabin was quiet, except for the pop of burning pine and the children's soft breathing from the other room. "Mr. McCord," Clara began gently, settling into the chair opposite him. "Is it true what they say about the railroad?" Elias's fingers tightened around his cup. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "They've been sniffing around. I'll handle it." "The children deserve to know if their home is at risk," Clara pressed carefully. "Perhaps if you explained." "I said I'll handle it." His voice was sharp as winter wind, but Clara caught something else beneath the anger, fear, maybe, or uncertainty. "Of course," she replied softly. "I only meant to help." Elias stood abruptly, setting his cup aside with a sharp click. "Let's turn in. Storm's coming tomorrow." Clara watched him stride to his room, noting how his shoulders carried the weight of more than just the day's work. She remained by the fire a while longer, remembering the cruel words in town, the averted eyes of neighbors, the whispered threats against his land. There was more here than Elias was saying. She could feel it in her bones as surely as she could feel the approaching storm. The railroad wasn't just after land. They were trying to erase something deeper, something tied to Elias's late wife and the heritage she'd left her children. Clara added another log to the fire, watching the flames catch and grow. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying the first whispers of snow. Tomorrow would bring the storm, but she suspected an even greater tempest was gathering around the McCord homestead, one that wouldn't be so easily weathered. Morning brought a thin sunshine that did little to warm the frozen landscape. Clara wrapped a woolen scarf around Lily's small shoulders, tucking the ends carefully beneath her coat. Sam stood by the door, already fidgeting with impatience. A rope from their father's small wood sled looped around his mittened hand. "Now remember," Clara said, adjusting Lily's hat, "we're looking for dry branches under the snow. The kind that snap clean when you bend them." They crunched through the crusted snow, Sam dragging the sled behind them with determined steps. The frozen creek lay ahead, its surface gleaming like polished glass beneath a dusting of fresh powder. Lily kept close to Clara's side, her small hand finding its way into Clara's as they walked. "Mama used to take us gathering here," Lily whispered, so softly Clara almost missed it. It was the first time the child had mentioned her mother, and Clara gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Look there," Clara pointed, diverting attention to a fallen pine branch mostly free of snow. "That's exactly what we need." Sam darted forward, eager to prove his usefulness. He was struggling to break the branch into manageable pieces when a figure emerged from the tree line downstream. Clara tensed until she recognized Mrs. Prentice, the widow who lived in the valley below. The older woman raised a mittened hand in greeting, making her way carefully along the creek bank toward them. Her face was kind beneath her wool bonnet, lined with the wisdom of years spent in these mountains. "Morning, Miss Winslow," Mrs. Prentice called out. "Children." She nodded to Sam and Lily, who had ducked shyly behind Clara's skirts. "Blessed day for kindling gathering." "Indeed it is, Mrs. Prentice," Clara replied warmly. "The sun's a welcome sight after yesterday's clouds." Mrs. Prentice glanced around before stepping closer, her voice dropping. "Wanted to mention Ben. Some strangers asking questions down at the trading post about Elias's claim on that land of his." She adjusted her shawl, eyes serious. "Railroad men, by the look of them, though they weren't saying so directly." Clara's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady for the children's sake. "Thank you for telling me. We'll keep watch." "You do that," Mrs. Prentice said. Elias's proud might not take kindly to warnings, but that land belonged to his wife's people before the treaties, and some folks don't cotton to that fact. She patted Lily's head gently. You children mind Miss Winslow now. They watched her continue upstream, her dark shawl soon lost among the trees. Clara helped the children gather more kindling, her mind turning over Mrs. Prentice's words. The sled was nearly full when they started back toward the cabin. They found Elias on the barn roof, hammer in hand, replacing shingles that the winter winds had torn loose. The icy breeze cut straight through Clara's coat as she watched him work, his movements sure despite the precarious angle. "Mr. McCord," she called up. "Perhaps I could help? Pass up supplies at least?" "Got it handled," he answered shortly, not looking down. But Clara noticed how the wind nearly took his balance, how his fingers must be stiff with cold. "The children and I gathered plenty of kindling." She tried again. "We could all said I got it handled." His tone left no room for argument. Clara led the children inside, helping them shed their snow-covered outer clothes. As she prepared supper, she couldn't shake the memory of Mrs. Prentice's warning, or the sight of Elias working alone against the wind. That evening, as they sat around the table, Clara served up bowls of steaming bean soup and cornbread. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "we might want to put aside some extra food. Store it proper, in case weather or other trouble ... keeps us from town a spell." Elias's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. He frowned, but after a long moment simply said, "Pantry's got space on the back shelf." It wasn't exactly permission, but Clara would take it as such. Later, after the dishes were done and the fire banked for the night, Clara checked on the children before retiring. The temperature had dropped sharply, and she found them huddled together, shivering despite their quilts. Gently, she tucked the blankets tighter around their small forms. Without thinking, she began to hum softly, an old hymn she'd learned years ago. Lily's eyes flew open. "Mama sang that," she whispered, "about the precious Lord taking her hand ... Clara's voice faltered, but Lily reached out, touching her arm. "Please don't stop. Stop." So Clara hummed on, watching the children's eyes grow heavy. In the quiet of the cabin, her voice carried the gentle melody until their breathing deepened into sleep. Through the thin wall, in his own room, Elias lay still in the darkness. His eyes were closed, but he wasn't sleeping. He listened as Clara's humming faded into silence, remembering another voice that had once sung those same words in the night. A voice now stilled, like the frozen creek, beneath winter's heavy blanket. Days melted together like snowflakes on warm glass. Each morning brought fresh powder, turning the mountain world into endless white. Inside the cabin, Clara found her rhythm with the twins, spreading old primers across the scrubbed kitchen table after the breakfast dishes were cleared. "Now then," she said, pulling a battered McGuffey reader from her carpetbag. "Who can tell me what sound these letters make together?" Lily traced the words with her small finger, brow furrowed in concentration. Sam fidgeted on his bench, more interested in the smell of molasses cookies baking in the iron stove. "If you both read this page," Clara promised, "we'll check those cookies while they're still warm." The prospect of sweet rewards worked magic on their attention. Soon both children were sounding out words, their voices growing more confident with each try. Clara noticed how Sam's shoulders straightened when he got something right, how Lily's eyes sparkled when she recognized a word from their last lesson. "Miss Clara," Lily asked, looking up from her page, "could we make the cookies spell words next time?" "That's clever thinking," Clara smiled, already planning how to shape the dough into letters. Teaching came easier when mixed with things the children loved. The afternoon light was fading when sharp knocks echoed through the cabin. 3 precise raps that made Clara's spine stiffen. She wasn't expecting the sound of polished boots on the porch steps. Elias strode from the back room, his face hardening as he opened the door. A well-dressed man stood there, his city coat unmarked by travel dust, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. "Mr. McCord," the man said smoothly, removing his hat. "I'm Jonathan Halper, representing the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. Might I come in?" This weather's rather bitter for doorway conversation. Elias didn't move. "State your business." "Very well." Halper's smile didn't warm his eyes. "I'm here about your land claim, sir. There seem to be some irregularities with the deed, particularly concerning its transfer from your late father-in-law." Clara guided the children toward their room, but Sam planted his feet, watching the exchange with worried eyes. "My claim's solid," Elias growled. "Been working this land 15 years. But you see," Halper extracted papers from his portfolio. "Territorial law has specific requirements about property conveyed from tribal members. Your father-in-law's status as a Ute elder doesn't actually grant him authority to get out." Elias's voice was low, dangerous. "Mr. McCord, please be reasonable. The railroad is prepared to offer fair compensation." "I said get out." Elias grabbed the papers, crumpling them as he shoved them back at Halper. "This is my land, my children's land. Their mother's people lived here before your laws even existed." Halper carefully smoothed his papers, tucking them away. "We'll be in touch, Mr. McCord. Do consider our offer. Things could become legally complicated otherwise." The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Elias stood there, his hand still pressed against the rough wood. Clara saw the tremor in his fingers, the way his jaw clenched against words he wouldn't speak in front of the children. Without a word, he grabbed his axe and stormed out the back door. Soon the rhythmic thunk of splitting wood echoed across the snowy yard, harder and faster than necessary for the task. Clara found the twins huddled in their doorway. "Come," she said gently. "Let's check those cookies while I tell you a story." They gathered around the warm stove, the smell of molasses wrapping around them like a comfort blanket. Clara broke the cookies into shares while she began her tale. "Once there was a shepherd who lived high in the mountains, just like us. He had a flock of sheep that he loved dearly, and the most beautiful grazing land anyone had ever seen. Was it this land?" Lily asked, crumbs dotting her chin. "Perhaps it was," Clara smiled. "One day, strangers came who wanted to take the shepherd's land away. They had fancy papers and fine clothes, but they didn't understand that the land wasn't just dirt and grass to the shepherd. It was his home, his children's future, his whole heart." Sam's eyes drifted to the window, where the sound of chopping continued in the gathering dusk. "What did the shepherd do?" "He stood firm," Clara said softly. "He knew what was right, and he had faith that truth would win in the end. He protected his flock, not just with his strength, but with his love and wisdom too." The chopping sounds grew slower, more deliberate. Sam's shoulders tensed with each distant thunk, his young face drawn with worry as he watched the door. "Why don't we set aside a plate of cookies for your father?" Clara suggested. "He'll be cold when he comes in." Sam nodded, carefully selecting the biggest cookies from the batch. He placed them on a tin plate and set it near a fire to stay warm, then resumed his vigil by the window, watching through the frost-touched glass for his father's return. Clara's heart ached at the sight, such adult concern in such young eyes. She busied herself with the evening chores, but kept glancing at the door herself, listening to the steady rhythm of the axe splitting wood in the deepening cold. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of rose and gold. Clara stood at the cabin window, watching Elias saddle his horse for the ride to the mission. The morning air sparkled with ice crystals, and his breath formed clouds in the frigid air. "I'll be back before sundown," he said, adjusting the cinch. The twins know their chores. Clara nodded, pulling her shawl tighter. The pastor might have records that could help. The missions keep careful accounts. Elias grunted in response, but Clara caught the flicker of worry in his eyes before he turned away. The horses' hooves crunched through the crusted snow as they disappeared down the trail, leaving the valley in stillness. Inside, the twins still slept. Clara seized the quiet moment to tackle the storage loft she'd been meaning to clean. Dust. Motes danced in the pale light streaming through the small window as she climbed the ladder. The space smelled of cedar and old leather, packed with crates and supplies for the long mountain winters. As she shifted a stack of quilts, her hand brushed something solid. A small chest, crafted from dark wood and worn smooth with age, sat tucked beneath the eaves. Clara hesitated, knowing she shouldn't pry, but something about it drew her attention. The lid wasn't latched. Inside, carefully folded, lay treasures that made her heart catch. A pair of beaded moccasins, their leather supple despite the years, decorated with intricate patterns that spoke of loving hands. A shawl, its weave still beautiful though faded, carried the faint scent of pine smoke and sage. Beneath these, Clara spotted the corner of a paper, its official seal visible even in the dim light. She left everything exactly as she'd found it, closing the chest with gentle reverence. These weren't her memories to disturb, but the glimpse of that seal nagged at her thoughts as she finished cleaning, wondering if it might hold answers they desperately needed. The sun had begun its westward slide when Elias returned. Clara met him at the door, her hands dusted with flour from the bread she'd been kneading. "Mr. Muckord," she said quietly, after the children had run outside to tend the chickens. "While cleaning today, I found something you should know about. There's a chest in the loft." His expression darkened. "My wife's things." "Yes," Clara nodded. "I didn't disturb them, but I noticed a paper with an official seal. I thought you should know, with everything that's happening." Elias stood very still, firelight casting shadows across his face. Then he turned abruptly, climbing the ladder to the loft. Clara heard his heavy steps above, then the scrape of the chest being moved. When he descended, he held the paper in hands that trembled slightly. Unfolding it carefully, he spread it on the table. The territorial seal was clear, though the document itself was incomplete, just the bottom portion of what appeared to be a land transfer agreement. Sarah's father insisted on proper papers, Elias said softly, his finger tracing the partial signatures. Didn't trust handshakes when it came to his daughter's future. "Can this help?" Clara asked, studying the formal script. Elias's jaw tightened. "Maybe. There's a witness who was their old Jed Weller. He saw the whole thing, watched the agent approve the transfer." He paused, looking out the window at the gathering clouds. "But Weller's place is 2 days' ride, up near Timberline. And those clouds mean storms coming." Clara followed his gaze to the darkening sky. The air had that heavy feeling that preceded mountain snow, and the wind was picking up, rattling the window panes. "How long before the railroad makes their next move?" she asked. "Can't say." Elias folded the paper carefully. "But helpers type don't waste time once they've shown their hand." Sam appeared in the doorway, his arms full of kindling. "Pa, are we gonna lose our home?" Elias turned sharply, his expression softening at his son's worried face. "No, boy. This land's ours. Your mother's people lived here long before any railroad came along." He glanced at the paper in his hands. "And we've got proof. Just need to gather it proper." "Then we should go to Mr. Weller," Clara said firmly. "Storm or no storm, the children could stay with Mrs. Prentice." "No," Elias cut in. "They stay here. I'll ride out tomorrow. Try to beat the worst of the weather." "You'll need someone to watch your back trail," Clara insisted. "And another set of eyes if the snow gets heavy." Elias stared at her for a long moment, measuring her words. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the pine trees. Finally, he nodded, just once. "Be ready at first light," he said gruffly. "And pray that storm holds off long enough to get there and back." The pale winter sun had barely cleared the mountain peaks when they set out. Clara helped Elias wrap the twins in thick wool blankets, tucking hot bricks wrapped in flannel near their feet in the sleigh. Sam clutched his wooden horse while Lily hugged her rag doll close, both children wide-eyed with excitement at the prospect of what they called their trip adventure. "Mind you stay covered," Clara reminded them, adjusting Lily's woolen cap. The morning air bit sharp and clean, promising more snow despite the clear sky. Their breath rose in white puffs as Elias checked the horses' harness one final time. The sleigh runners whispered over the packed snow as they started down the valley. Clara sat beside Elias on the driver's bench, sharing the buffalo robe across their laps. The children's chatter gradually faded to drowsy silence, lulled by the steady motion and jingling harness bells. By midday, the wind had picked up, driving loose snow across their path. They stopped to water the horses at a half-frozen creek, the ice cracking like pistol shots in the cold air. Clara helped the twins stretch their legs while Elias consulted his pocket watch, frowning at the gathering clouds. "Thompson's place is about 3 hours ahead," he said, scanning the horizon. "We can stable there for the night if they're willing." Clara nodded, helping Lily back into the sleigh. The children could use a proper rest by then. The afternoon stretched long as they pushed on through deepening snow. The twins huddled closer together, sharing stories in whispers. When they finally spotted Thompson's barn through the swirling flakes, the sun was already touching the western peaks. Jane Thompson met them at the door, her weathered face creasing in a welcome smile. "Lord above, Elias McCord, bringing your whole family out in this weather. Much obliged if we could shelter tonight," Elias said, helping Clara down from the sleigh. "Storm's coming faster than we figured." Come in, come in." Jane ushered them toward the warmth of her kitchen. "Joe's just put coffee on." The Thompsons' kitchen glowed with lamplight and wood smoke. Joe Thompson, tall and lean as a fence post, pulled extra chairs to the table while his wife stirred up a pot of beans. The twins soon dozed by the hearth, wrapped in borrowed quilts. "Railroad men been through here too," Joe reported over steaming coffee cups, asking questions about old land claims, particularly those tied to Indian treaties. Elias's jaw tightened. "They're trying to void my deed. Claim it ain't valid coming from Sarah's father." Jane clicked her tongue in disapproval. "That ain't right. Your claim's as solid as any." Clara sat near the fire, mending a tear in Lily's mitten by lamplight. The wool thread gleamed as her needle moved, steady and sure. She felt Elias watching her, his gaze thoughtful in the firelight's glow. When she glanced up, he looked away quickly, but something had shifted in his expression. They bedded down in the barn's clean hay loft. The children nestled between them like puppies in a den. Outside, the wind rose steadily through the night, rattling the barn boards. Morning brought heavy snow and leaden skies. They pressed on regardless, the horses struggling through drifts that grew deeper with each mile. By mid-morning, they reached the approach to Eagle Pass. The narrow trail wound between towering cliffs, barely visible through the thickening storm. Elias reined in the team, studying the pass with hard eyes. The wind howled through the granite walls, driving sheets of snow before it. Clara held the twins close, feeling their shivers despite the blankets. "Can't risk it," Elias finally ground out. "Pass'll be drifted shut halfway up. We'd lose the horses. Maybe worse." Clara saw the defeat in his shoulders as he turned the sleigh around. "We'll try again," she said softly. "When the weather breaks." The return journey seemed twice as long. The twins unusually quiet as disappointment settled over them. When they finally reached home, the cabin's dark windows offered little welcome. "No adventure," Sam muttered, kicking at the snow as they unloaded. Lily's lower lip trembled. Didn't even get to see Mr. Weller's horses. Clara knelt before them, brushing snow from their coats. "This was just the first try," she assured them. "As soon as the pass clears, we'll make another attempt. And this time, we'll plan even better. Maybe pack some of those honey cakes you both love so much." The promise of future adventure and honey cakes brought small smiles to their faces. Even Elias's stern expression softened slightly as he watched Clara with the children. "Come on now," she said, shepherding them toward the cabin. "Let's get a fire going and warm up properly. Then you can tell me all about what you'd like to do on our next journey." The twins scampered inside, their spirits lifting as they began, planning elaborate schemes for their next trip adventure. Clara caught Elias's eye as she followed them in. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of her way with the children, before turning to tend to the horses in the growing storm. A week after their failed journey, warm Chinook winds swept down from the mountains, softening the crusted snow. Elias stood at the barn door early one morning, studying the weather-worn peaks with knowing eyes. The temperature had risen enough to make the icicles drip steadily from the eaves. "Gotta get those logs down while we can," he told Clara over breakfast. "Pass'll likely close again soon enough." Clara nodded, passing him another helping of cornbread. "How long will you be gone?" "Should make it back by nightfall." Elias paused, watching the twins push their porridge around their bowls. "Mind keeping an eye on things here, of course." Clara gathered the empty dishes. "In fact, I thought we might pay Mrs. Prentice a visit. The children could use some fresh air, and she mentioned having extra yarn for mending." Elias considered this, then gave a short nod. "Stay on the main trail. Weather can turn quick this time of year." The morning sun had warmed the air considerably. By the time Clara and the twins set out for Mrs. Prentice's cabin, Sam trudged through the melting snow ahead of them, while Lily skipped alongside Clara, chattering about the birds returning to the valley. Mrs. Prentice welcomed them with hot tea and molasses cookies, her cabin fragrant with dried herbs hanging from the rafters. While the children played with her old barn cat by the hearth, the women shared news and worked on mending. "Railroad men been through again," Mrs. Prentice mentioned quietly, her needle flashing in the afternoon light, asking all sorts of questions about property lines and water rights. Clara's hands stilled on her work. "They're getting bolder." "That they are." The older woman shook her head. "Folk downstream are worried. If Elias loses his claim, others might too." The shadows were lengthening when Clara decided it was time to head home. They bid Mrs. Prentice goodbye, promising to visit again soon. The trail back was muddy now, the snow melting fast in the unseasonable warmth. They were about halfway home when Sam stopped suddenly, pointing toward the horizon. "Miss Clara, look." Dark smoke rose against the blue sky, twisting up from the direction of their cabin. Clara's heart jumped into her throat. "Stay close," she ordered, quickening their pace as they drew nearer. They could see the source. Elias's supply shed was ablaze, flames licking hungrily at the wooden walls. The main cabin stood untouched, but the shed where they stored grain, tools, and winter supplies was nearly consumed. "Inside, both of you." Clara directed the wide-eyed twins toward the cabin. "Bar the door and don't open it unless you hear my voice or your father's." She worked quickly, throwing buckets of melting snow onto the flames, but the fire had too much of a head start. By the time the last flames sputtered out, the shed was nothing but smoking ruins. The sun had set, and the temperature was dropping again. When they heard hoofbeats approaching, Clara positioned herself between the cabin and the sound, her father's old rifle steady in her hands. But it was Elias who emerged from the gathering darkness, his face and clothes smudged with soot. Bah! The twins burst from the cabin, having disobeyed Clara's orders to stay inside. Elias swept them up in a fierce embrace before setting them down and turning to Clara. "Caught 2 men running off when I rode up," he said grimly. "Wearing masks, but I bet my last dollar they're railroad men. One dropped this." He held up a torn piece of paper. A railroad company letterhead. Clara lowered the rifle. "Are you hurt?" "Just singed." His eyes swept over the burned shed. "Lost most of our supplies. Feed, grain, tools. That load of lumber I'd been saving." His fists clenched. "They mean to starve us out before spring. We should tell the sheriff," Clara insisted, following him into the cabin. The twins huddled together by the fire, unusually quiet. Elias's laugh was bitter as he poured a cup of coffee. "Sheriff Webb? Man owes his badge to the same fellows who own the railroad. He'd sooner arrest me for causing trouble than help protect what's rightfully mine." "Then what do we do?" Elias stared into the flames for a long moment. "We survive. We adapt. And we prove our claim before they can take everything." He looked at the twins, then at Clara. "Got more than just land to protect now." Clara began pulling out what food they had stored in the cabin. It wasn't much, some flour, dried beans, and salted pork, but it would have to do. As she worked, she could hear Elias outside, salvaging what he could from the ruins of the shed. The night grew cold again, the warm Chinook winds giving way to winter's grip. Inside the cabin, Clara tucked the twins into bed, soothing their fears with quiet songs and gentle words. Through the window, she could see Elias still working by lantern light, his shadow moving against the scorched walls of what remained of the shed. The railroad had made their move, turning from legal pressure to outright destruction. As Clara knelt for her evening prayers, she added a special petition for protection, not just for their supplies and shelter, but for the family that was slowly growing together under this threatened roof. The morning after the fire, Clara rose before dawn to assess their dwindling supplies. She carefully counted what remained: 3 sacks of flour, 2 jars of preserved peaches, a half-barrel of salted pork, and dried beans that might last 2 weeks if they were careful. The cold storage cellar still held some potatoes and carrots, protected from the fire that had claimed their shed. Elias joined her in the kitchen, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "We'll make do," he said, watching her tally their stores. "Always have before." Clara nodded, tying her apron strings. "Sam can help me fetch water today. We'll need extra for washing and cooking. I'll start on the corral." Elias pulled on his coat. Some posts got knocked loose in yesterday's commotion. They worked through the morning, settling into an unspoken rhythm. Sam proved eager to help, hauling smaller buckets of water from the creek while Clara carried the larger ones. His small face was serious with concentration as he carefully navigated the slippery path. Inside the cabin, Lily sat at the table, her tiny fingers working through a pile of dried beans. She hummed softly while she sorted them, picking out any stones or damaged ones, just as Clara had shown her. "You're doing fine work there, Lily," Clara said, pausing to warm her hands by the stove. The little girl beamed at the praise, her dark braids swinging as she worked faster. By afternoon, Clara had finished the washing and basic chores. She found Elias at the corral, wrestling with a stubborn fence post. Without a word, she picked up a spare hammer and began working on the opposite side. The winter sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow as they worked. The air was crisp, but not bitter, and their labor kept them warm enough. "My, Thomas," Clara said suddenly, testing a post's stability. He loved working with his hands too. Said you could see God's purpose in honest work. Elise was quiet for a moment, driving another nail home. "Sarah, my wife, she used to say something similar. In her people's way, everything had meaning. Even the smallest task was sacred if done with the right heart. Clara nodded, understanding in her eyes. The twins have her look about them, especially Lily's smile. Aye, Ilya's voice softened. Sam has her spirit, though. Strong-willed as a mountain stream. They worked in comfortable silence after that, the rhythm of their hammers echoing across the snow-covered yard. The twins had finished their chores, and were now playing in the fresh snow, packing it into walls for a fort. Look, Pa, Sam called out, proud of their creation. We made a fortress. Strong as the cabin, Lily added, patting snow into place. Elias paused in his work, watching them play. Clara saw something gentle touch his expression, softening the usual hard lines around his eyes. The sky darkened early, as it did in winter, driving them all inside. Clara set about making supper while the twins helped set the table. The cabin, filled with warmth and the smell of beans simmering with salt pork. Miss Clara, Lily said seriously as she spooned up her supper, you cook better than Pa. She glanced quickly at her father, worried she might have said something wrong. But Elias's mouth twitched, almost forming a smile. Can't argue with that truth, he said, reaching for another piece of cornbread. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. She'd seen more of Elias's heart today than in all the weeks before, glimpses of the man behind the stern facade. After the dishes were done and the twins tucked into bed, Clara stood at the window, watching snow begin to fall. The flakes drifted down soft and thick, already starting to cover the day's tracks and work. Good weather for it, Elias said quietly, joining her at the window. Snow will help preserve what meat we have left in the cold storage. Clara nodded, watching the white blankets settle over the valley. The burned shed was just a dark shape now, its charred beams slowly disappearing under fresh snow. But she found her thoughts weren't on their losses or the threats still facing them. Instead, she remembered the sound of Elias's hammer working alongside her own, the quiet sharing of memories, and the almost smile at supper. Sometimes, she reflected, strength could be found in the smallest moments, in shared work, in children's laughter, in the gentle falling of snow that covered old wounds and made everything new again. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with a pale sun glinting off fresh snow. Clara found Elias already up, checking the sleigh's runners and testing the horses' harnesses. Weather's holding, he said, adjusting a leather strap. We should try for Yet's place again. That paper might be the proof we need. Clara nodded, hurrying inside the pack. She wrapped the partial land document carefully in oilcloth and tucked it into her carpetbag along with bread and dried meat for the journey. The twins bounced with excitement as Mrs. Prentice arrived to watch them. Mind your manners, Clara reminded them, hugging each child tight. We'll be back soon as we can. The sleigh glided smoothly over the packed snow, bells jingling in the crisp air. Clara held the reins while Elias studied the terrain ahead, his rifle close at hand. By midday, they'd make good progress through the valley, the horse's breath steaming in the cold. Riders, Elias said suddenly, his voice low. He pointed to distant marks in the snow, 3 sets of hoofprints weaving through the trees, parallel to their trail. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. Following us? Reckon so. Elias quietly checked his rifle, making sure it was loaded. Keep steady. Don't let on we've spotted them. The afternoon wore on, tension building with each mile. Clara forced herself to breathe normally, though her heart hammered. The shadow riders kept their distance, but their presence weighed heavy in the quiet air as the sun sank toward the mountains, painting the snow in amber and rose. They entered a narrow stretch between 2 rocky slopes. Clara saw Elias stiffen, his eyes scanning the heights. Perfect place for, he started to say, when shots cracked through the air. The horses reared, their screams mixing with the gunfire. Clara yanked the reins, fighting to control them as three masked riders burst from the trees. Elias's rifle boomed, making one attacker pull up short. "Down!" Elias shouted, shoving Clara low as another shot whizzed past. He stood to fire again, but a rider charged close, swinging a heavy branch. It caught Elias on the temple with a sickening crack. He crumpled into the sleigh. Clara screamed as rough hands grabbed her carpetbag. She clutched it, but a sharp blow to her fingers forced her to let go. Through tears of pain and fear, she saw the riders gallop away, her bag, with the precious document, disappearing into the gathering dusk. "Elias?" Her voice shook as she touched his face. Blood trickled from his hairline, but his eyes fluttered. "Open. Had to be railroad men," he mumbled. "Knew we were coming. Stay awake," Clara ordered, gathering the reins. "Keep talking to me." She turned the sleigh toward home, pushing the horses as fast as she dared in the failing light. Elias's voice grew weaker, his words slurring. "Tell me about the twins," Clara said firmly, fighting her own trembling. "Tell me about the day they were born." "Spring morning," he murmured. Sarah said, "They were eager as new colts, ... Clara kept him talking, asking questions, demanding responses when he fell silent. The miles seemed endless, but finally their cabin came into view, lamplight glowing in the windows. Mrs. Prentice helped her get Elias inside. The twins hovered anxiously as Clara cleaned the wound, her hand shaking so badly she could barely thread the needle to stitch the gash. "Pa," Sam's voice quavered. "Your pa's strong," Clara assured him, though her heart ached at the fear in the boy's eyes. "He just needs rest now." She worked steadily, forcing her fingers to be gentle as she bandaged Elias's head. The railroad men had taken their evidence, but they hadn't taken their lives, and for that, at least, she was grateful. Still, as she watched Elias's pale face in the lamplight, she couldn't stop her hands from trembling at how close they'd come to worse. Morning light crept through the cabin windows, casting pale squares on the rough-hewn floor. Clara checked Elias's bandage, frowning at the purple bruise spreading across his temple. He tried to sit up but swayed, his face going ashen. "You need rest," she said firmly, pressing his shoulder back against the pillow. "The wound's deep, and you took a hard hit." "Can't lie here," Elias growled, though his words still slurred slightly. "Stock needs tending. Wood needs splitting. The twins. And I will manage." Clara adjusted his blanket, her touch gentle but brooking no argument. "Sam's getting stronger with the hatchet, and Lily's good with the chickens." Elias subsided, frustration etched in every line of his face. Outside, the morning air bit sharp and clean as Clara guided Sam through stacking kindling. The boy's determination showed in his furrowed brow as he lined up each piece just so. "Like this, Miss Clara?" he asked, hefting the hatchet carefully. "Perfect stance," she nodded. "Remember to let the weight of the blade do the work." She demonstrated again, the steel biting cleanly through a piece of pine. Lily called from the chicken coop, her voice bright with triumph. "Got 6 eggs today." The speckled hen was hiding hers under some straw. Clara smiled, watching the little girl cradle her basket. These children had their father's strength, she realized, and their mother's gentle touch with animals. The thought of them losing their home to the railroad's greed made her chest tight with anger. As morning melted into afternoon, Clara kept busy with chores while checking regularly on Elias. He drifted in and out of sleep, muttering sometimes about the ambush. She spooned broth into him when he was awake enough, trying not to show her worry when he could barely hold the cup steady. After putting the twins to bed that evening, Clara sat at the kitchen table with her mission notes spread before her. The lamp threw dancing shadows as she reviewed her careful writing from weeks earlier. Something tugged at her memory, a detail she jotted down during one of Mrs. Prentice's visits. There, in the margin of her journal, Jed Weller had been more than just a witness. He'd kept his own records of land transfers, including copies of the original documents. They didn't need just his testimony. They needed his papers. Clara's hands trembled as she traced the words. The railroad men had stolen their partial proof, but complete evidence still existed. If only they could reach Jed before the pass closed again. She glanced at Elias, who lay pale and still in his bed. He wouldn't be able to ride for at least a week, maybe longer. But the weather was holding clear for now, a rare blessing in these mountains. They might not get another chance before spring. The twins' soft breathing filled the quiet cabin as Clara paced, weighing her options. She knew the trail to Yet's place. They'd covered most of it during their failed attempt. She could ride faster alone, without the sleigh. 2 days there, 2 days back. Mrs. Prentice could watch the children again, but Elias would never agree to let her go alone. The railroad men were still out there, probably watching the cabin. The thought made her shiver. Yet what choice did they have? Every day they waited was another day the railroad could pressure Jed or destroy his records. They needed those papers. Clara knelt beside her bed, clasping her hands in prayer. "Lord, give me wisdom," she whispered, "and courage if this is the right path." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks up the chimney. Clara rose, her decision made. She would leave at first light, before Elias was awake enough to stop her. The children would be safe with Mrs. Prentice, and she'd take the fastest horse, the bay mare that Elias said could run for hours. She began gathering supplies: jerky, hard bread, an extra blanket. Her hands moved surely in the lamplight as she packed her saddlebags. Fear still fluttered in her stomach, but underneath it lay a bedrock of determination. This land belonged to the twins, their mother's legacy, their father's life's work. Clara might be just a hired teacher, here only for the winter, but she'd grown to love these children. She couldn't stand by while their inheritance was stolen. She checked Elias one last time before retiring to her room. His breathing was steady, some color finally returning to his face. Tomorrow she would leave him a note explaining her plan. He'd be furious, of course, but if she succeeded, his anger would be worth it. Clara lay awake long into the night, listening to the wind sing through the pines and planning her route. The pass would be dangerous, but she'd seen Elias navigate it. She could do this. She had to. Dawn would come soon, bringing with it the greatest test of courage she'd faced since losing her husband. But as she finally drifted towards sleep, Clara felt a strange peace settle over her. The path ahead was clear, even if it was perilous. She would ride for Yet's place, alone but resolute, carrying the hopes of this small family in her heart. Clara hitched the horses to the sled before Dawn's first pale fingers touched the mountain peaks. Her breath clouded in the frigid air as she checked each strap and buckled twice. No room for mistakes. Not with the children's lives in her hands. Sam and Lily emerged from the cabin, bundled in every warm piece of clothing they owned. Clara had left a detailed note for Elias, explaining her change of plans. Taking the twins wasn't what she'd originally intended, but she couldn't leave them alone with their injured father. "Up you go," she whispered, helping them into the sled. She tucked the heavy quilts around their small bodies, making sure no cold air could creep in. "We're going on an adventure to help your pa." Sam's eyes were serious as he nodded. "I'll keep watch, Miss Clara, like Paya taught me." The sled runners whispered over the snow as they set out, the early morning still and sharp around them. Clara kept the horses at a steady pace, watching the sky. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising weather, but they had to press on. By midday, the storm Clara had feared rolled in with full force. Snow pelted them sideways, driven by a bitter wind that cut through their layers of wool and cotton. Lily huddled closer to her brother, their faces barely visible in their wrappings. "There's a line shack ahead," Clara called over the wind, remembering the abandoned shelter from their previous attempt at this journey. "We'll wait it out there." The small cabin appeared through the swirling white like an answer to prayer. Clara helped the children inside while snow plastered her coat. The interior was musty but dry, with a small iron stove and stack of splitwood left by some thoughtful traveler. "Sam, would you check those windows are latched tight?" Clara asked, keeping the boy busy while she worked to start a fire. "Lily, sweep this corner clean for our blankets." Soon the stove radiated blessed heat. Clara filled a pot with clean snow and set it to melt for tea. Sam stationed himself by the single window, watching for the movement of predators through the storm. "Coyotes sometimes den up in weather like this," he explained seriously, sounding so much like his father that Clara had to hide a smile. They passed the afternoon in the shack, sharing jerky and hard biscuits, waiting for the worst of the storm to pass. Clara told stories to keep the children's spirits up, tales of brave pioneers and faithful hearts that always found their way home. As evening approached, the wind finally began to die. They set out again, Clara pushing the horses as much as she dared in the gathering dark. The moon rose, turning the fresh snow into a silver blanket that stretched endlessly before them. They spent that night huddled in the sled, taking turns staying awake. Clara barely slept, listening for any sound that might mean danger. But only the soft breathing of the twins and the occasional cry of a night bird broke the silence. The next day dawned clear and cold. By mid-morning, they finally spotted smoke rising from a chimney in the distance. Jed Weller's cabin. Clara's heart leaped with hope as they approached. The old settler met them at his door, his face weathered as leather, but his eyes sharp and alert. He took in Clara and the children with one assessing look. "You're Elias McCord's bunch," he said. "Not really a question. Come in before you freeze solid." Inside, his cabin was neat and warm, with papers and books stacked carefully on every surface. Jed listened intently as Clara explained their situation, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "Railroad men, eh?" He spat into the fire, expecting them to try something like this. "Good thing I keep records of everything." He reached for a strongbox on a high shelf. The children watched wide-eyed as Jed pulled out a leather folder and began sorting through documents. His gnarled fingers moved with surprising delicacy over the papers. "Here it is," he said finally, drawing out a single sheet. Complete copy of the treaty page, territorial seal and all. Shows the legal transfer of lands from Chief Walking Bear to his daughter, Elias his wife, with all proper witnesses signed. Clara's hand shook slightly as she examined the document. The territorial seal stood out clearly at the bottom, along with multiple signatures. This was exactly what they needed, proof that couldn't be disputed. "Mr. Weller," she said formally, "I promise to guard this with my life. You've saved their home with this." The old man nodded, his eyes soft as he looked at the twins. Known 3 generations of that family. Lands theirs by right and law both. You get that paper to wherever it needs to go. Clara carefully wrapped the precious document in oilskin and tucked it into her inner coat pocket, close to her heart. The weight of it felt like hope itself, solid and real against her chest. The journey back to town tested every ounce of their strength. Snow whipped across their faces as Clara guided the horses through deepening drifts, the precious document secure against her chest. Sam and Lily huddled close, their small faces brave despite the biting cold. The magistrate's office stood at the end of the muddy main street, its windows glowing warm against the winter gloom. Clara straightened her spine, took each child by the hand, and marched up the wooden steps. Her boots left wet prints on the floor as they entered. Inside, railroad agent Helper stood near the pot-bellied stove, his polished boots and silk vest a stark contrast to Clara's snow-dampened wool coat. Several townspeople lingered near the walls, watching with keen interest. "Miss Winslow," the magistrate said, surprise evident in his voice. "What brings you out in such weather?" Clara drew the oilskin-wrapped document from her coat. "Justice, sir, and proof of the McCord family's rightful claim to their land." Her voice carried clearly through the quiet room. Halper stepped forward, his smile condescending. "Now, my dear lady." "The proof, Mr. Halper," Clara interrupted firmly, unfolding Jed Weller's document on the magistrate's desk, complete with the territorial seal and all witness signatures, including Chief Walking Bear's mark. The magistrate adjusted his spectacles, examining the paper carefully. The gathered townspeople craned their necks to see. Minutes stretched like hours as he read. Finally, he looked up. "This claim is ironclad. The McCord ownership stands." He fixed Halper with a stern gaze. "The railroad will need to find another route." A approving murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara squeezed the twins' hands, her heart soaring. The office door creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air. There stood Elias McCord, leaning slightly against the doorframe, his head still bandaged, but his eyes clear and proud as they met Clara's. In that moment, something shifted between them, warm as spring sunshine melting winter snow. Spring crept into the valley like a gentle awakening. Tender green shoots pushed through melting snow, and morning sunlight caught the drip of icicles from the cabin's eaves. Inside, the home hummed with new life and old comfort merged together. Clara stood at the door each dawn, watching fluffy chicks scurry after their mother hen in the pen while Sam and Lily scattered feed. Their laughter rang clear across the yard, mingling with the sound of Elias splitting wood or mending fences. The dinner table, once silent, now buzzed with stories and plans shared over steaming bowls. When Sunday dawned bright and mild, the little church filled with familiar faces. Sunlight streamed through plain glass windows, catching dust motes that danced in the air. After the final hymn faded, Elias McCord straightened his freshly brushed coat and cleared his throat. Standing tall beside Clara, his voice carried to every corner. "You came here only to look after my twins," he said, his usually stern face softening. "Now you've gone and taken my heart, too." Sam and Lily jumped up with delighted whoops while the congregation's warm laughter filled the room. Mrs. Prentice dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and even the pastor couldn't hide his smile. They married right there, beneath the rough-hewn cross. Clara's hands were steady in Elias's as they spoke their vows, their words simple but deep as mountain pools. The twins pressed close, a family becoming whole. Afterward, the celebration spilled into the churchyard. Ute neighbors who knew Elias's late wife sat alongside settler families, sharing bread and stories. Children played between the graves, while elders nodded over cups of coffee. The valley itself seemed to breathe easier, as if winter's last chill had finally lifted, leaving only warmth behind. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect, US, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.